If you think Malcolm Turnbull's leadership is in turmoil, then it's nothing compared to what's happening here in the United States with President Donald Trump. It's a year since the election, and he continues to be dogged by accusations he only won the top job because of Russian meddling. The most serious claims, now the subject of a special investigation, are that Russian spies offered the Trump campaign dirt in return for a promise to overturn tough US anti-corruption laws. If those allegations are proven, key members of Donald Trump's inner circle could face jail time and perhaps even implicate the president himself.
Together, we will make America great again. Thank you. God bless you.
Exactly 1 year ago, Americans elected Donald Trump as president on a promise he'd make the country great again. Today, his populist agenda has stalled, crippled by allegations of impropriety and corruption.
It's becoming clear that the Russians were attempting to influence the campaign and jockey for position with the Trump campaign and get their preferred candidate into office. It's really important, no matter what side of the aisle you sit on, to understand a foreign adversarial government appears to have been trying to influence the outcome of our election.
Frank Figliuzzi is a former assistant director for counterintelligence at the FBI. There, he worked for Robert Muller, the man now tasked with investigating the most damning accusations against the Trump team, that they colluded with Russia to help get Trump elected. Is Robert Muller the sort of guy who allows himself to be a party to a political witch hunt?
Everyone who worked for him will tell you that he's a man of integrity, that he's a straight-up guy, and that if you're guilty of something, he's the last person you want leading that investigation. But if you're innocent, he's the guy you're going to request to look into it.
Donald Trump has always denied scheming with the Russians to tip the top job in his favour.
All I can tell you is this. There was no collusion. There was no nothing. It's a disgrace, frankly, that they continue.
It's all fake news and a witch hunt, the president regularly cries.
The news is fake because so much of the news is fake.
But much to Trump's frustration, Robert Mueller's investigation is turning up the pressure.
I have nothing to do with Russia.
Any reaction, Mr. Manafort?
2 weeks ago, Trump's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, was hit with criminal charges of money laundering, acting as an undeclared foreign agent, and false statements. While Trump himself is not implicated, the message is clear.
The play being made here is that the unsealing of those, the announcements of indictments, send a strong message to others that this could happen to you, you need to cooperate, or we'll be showing up at your door with handcuffs.
This former Trump campaign advisor, 30-year-old George Papadopoulos, is also making the White House nervous.
George Papadopoulos, he's an oil and energy consultant, excellent guy.
Despite Donald Trump's early glowing character reference during the campaign, George Papadopoulos has just admitted lying to the FBI about a meeting where he discussed potentially colluding with Russian agents to get dirt on Trump's opponent, Hillary Clinton.
This guy was what we call a wannabe.
Michael Caputo was a senior campaign advisor for Donald Trump and says Papadopoulos was little more than a coffee boy.
And he got himself way in over his head. That's what's going to come out of here, out of this whole thing. And I can tell you, in the end, this kid Papadopoulos, he's going to be a verb. In 10 years, people will be saying here in America, "You got Papadopoulos," because this guy, it's almost a caricature of a young man on a campaign trying to leverage a non-existent relationship.
But Papadopoulos has now been working with federal prosecutors for months, an insider willing to reveal everything he knows about possible collusion. In so many political scandals, it's often the cover-up and not an actual crime that brings the candidate undone. Here in Washington, D.C., investigators are still weighing the evidence on whether Trump or any of his campaign team did anything illegal to help swing the election by colluding with the Russians. But right now, the big question is, are Trump or any of his senior officials lying about what really happened? If George Papadopoulos made a mistake, if he was the fool, and he's now admitted that he lied and misled FBI officials, how do you know for sure that people like Paul Manafort haven't as well?
I've known Manafort 35 years, and I've admired him for every one of those years. But if you look at the charges against all of these people, it has nothing to do with collusion with Russia that in any way, shape, or form penetrated the campaign. In any way. I don't believe it.
In Russia, those who publicly oppose Vladimir Putin are either in exile, in prison, or dead. And it certainly is true that there's a very high mortality rate, for some reason, among the people who dare to cross the path of Putin's Kremlin.
Vladimir Kara-Murza is one of the few people to publicly shine a light on the dark arts of the Russian government. But it has come at a cost.
Twice in the past 2 years, first in May of 2015 and the second time in February of 2017, both times in Moscow, I suddenly began experiencing symptoms of severe poisoning that led to a multiple organ failure, left me in a coma on life support, and doctors told my wife on both occasions that they estimated my chance of survival at about 5%. So I'm very fortunate and certainly very grateful to be sitting here and speaking with you today.
As an outspoken Russian activist, Mr. Kara-Murza believes Putin's Kremlin wants him dead. He's temporarily living in the US to recover from the latest poisoning. And he says Trump was played in the Kremlin's attempt to overturn a US anti-corruption law known as the Magnitsky Act. The Magnitsky Act is a bill introduced by President Barack Obama in 2012 to punish Russian officials responsible for the death of lawyer Sergei Magnitsky. It's since been expanded to target other human rights abusers. The Russian government vehemently opposes the law because among those affected by it are cronies of President Vladimir Putin, who stand to lose billions of dollars.
So this law laid down the principle that if you engage in human rights abuse in Russia, and if you engage in corruption in Russia, if you steal from the Russian people, you will no longer be able to get visas to Western countries, and you will no longer be able to use the financial and banking system of Western countries to park your stolen wealth.
Russia would do anything to get the law undone, including sending this Russian lawyer, Natalia Veshelnitskaya, to Trump Tower during the election campaign. It's here she met with the president's son, Donald Jr., the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and the president's campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, promising that she could deliver dirt on Hillary Clinton and pushing for that Magnitsky law to be neutered.
The reason those Kremlin proxies were at that meeting and had requested that meeting is to try to see if they could somehow weaken, undermine the Magnitsky Act. And I think this just once again drives home the point how crucial this issue is.
The meeting meeting should not have taken place under the premise that dirt was going to be discussed. Whether or not dirt was discussed, there's a problem with even agreeing to that meeting on that premise, right? Shouldn't have happened.
Not surprisingly, President Trump's campaign team says the meeting in Trump Tower was completely innocent. But this week, the Russian lawyer who attended it dropped a bombshell. She has now come out and admitted that there were promises made by Donald Trump Jr. that the Magnitsky laws could be re-examined if Trump won the election.
Well, I know that if you're wearing a tinfoil hat, that sounds awful, realistic, but indeed it's not. What she was doing was lobbying a potential nominee for the Republican presidential race to take a look at the Magnitsky Act. On its face, it's completely legal, but in this light of conspiracy and Trump-Russia collusion, it looks terrible.
Trump himself tweeted shortly before his inauguration, I have had nothing to do with Russia. That was at best, at worst, disingenuous, wasn't it?
In what way?
It's a lie.
Why?
He has had something to do with Russia. He knew full well that his son-in-law and his son had met with a Russian official who was offering incriminating information from the
There's no indication of that. What you're saying is not true. What you're alleging here is that the president knew that Veselnitskaya had made a meeting with his son and some other officials in the campaign. You're saying he knew that. There's absolutely zero proof of that.
Isn't it a bit
zero?
Neat? Isn't it a bit neat that his son and his son-in-law are at that meeting, and oh gosh, the president doesn't know?
No, what's neat about that? There's absolutely, I mean, you can assume that they report everything that happens in their day to their father and father-in-law. You can make that assumption, but you'd be wrong.
While the President of the United States is considered the most powerful man in the world, it's easy to argue that these days Special Counsel investigator Robert Muller is just as formidable. That's making a lot of people around the Oval Office very anxious. It's pretty obvious the big question is going to be, at some stage, did President Trump know? Now, we can't answer that question, can we, at the moment?
You and I can't answer that question, but it's possible that Mueller can and already knows. As we see this unfold, as we see the indictments getting closer and closer to the White House, it certainly looks like there's enough here to be deeply concerned if you're the president.